Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Are you kidding me? Lin Li broke out in a cold sweat. The ore-devouring beast, with the strength of at least level 15, was turned into ashes in an instant. This could almost rival the power of a legendary spell. Lin Li felt his legs turn weak when he recalled passing through the same colorful spectrum earlier on. Lin Li stood there with cold sweat in his palms, desperately trying to recall what had happened in that moment. The roar of the ore-devouring beast, the burning fireball, the colorful spectrum. Oh, yes, and the torrent of elements ring that was dazzling with red light. At the thought of this, Lin Li raised his hand in confusion and examined the torrent of elements ring on his hand with a strange look. The dark red light still flickered faintly. The scorching heat seemed to have been solidified. That was right, it was the torrent of elements ring. Lin Li remembered it distinctly. When he passed through the colorful spectrum, the red light on the torrent of elements ring seemed to gleam all of a sudden. At that moment, the colorful glow was like a shield. It not only firmly protected himself, but also Sean and Argus, who were beside him. Lin Li scratched his head with a sluggish look on his face. There was probably more to the secrets of the torrent of elements ring than he had imagined. He could still remember the Lich once said that this was the ring of Osric, the butcher, back in the Shadow Glen. Later, in order to unravel the secret of the ring, Lin Li specially searched for relevant information in the Omniscient Tower, including Osric's life and the massacre that shocked Amril. However, there was never a single word on or description of the ring. To think that this ring had revealed its miraculous nature once again in the Fire Plume Ridge. All of them had passed through the colorful spectrum. The ore-devouring beast had turned into a mass of ashes. The 3 living men had come out unscathed. The signs were so obvious that even a fool could see it was definitely related to the torrent of elements ring. As for what the relationship was, Lin Li was at a loss. All of this was really too bizarre. All the doubts were intertwined in a mess. It was almost impossible to even gather up the threads, let alone to uncover the secrets one by one. Shit. Just as Lin Li was puzzling over it, he suddenly realized a serious problem. This hell of a place. How do we go back? The colorful light ahead was still shining, just like a mirage that clearly reflected everything in the cave. But, with the ore-devouring beast serving as a warning, he dared not approach this spectrum of death even if he was given 100 times more courage. That was where a level 15 magical beast was reduced to ashes in a flash. Although he did not encounter any problem previously, who could guarantee that it would be equally safe should he do it again? It was not a big deal making a joke. But joking with one's life seemed to be a little too dumb. Lin Li hesitated for a moment, but at last shook his head resignedly. He looked around in the hopes of finding another way. It was then that he had the time to take a good look at this place. This was a totally different world, surrounded by green grasslands and bright wildflowers, and there was a beautiful forest farther away. When Lin Li lifted his eyes, he could see a few rabbits hopping out of the woods. All of this complemented a peaceful and harmonious scene. In addition to this harmony and tranquility, flames lit up the sky. The green grassland and the burning fire in the sky were 2 completely different scenes, but they were so harmoniously blended together that instead of adding a hint of cruelty to this grassland, it unexpectedly added some gorgeous colors to the surroundings. Lin Li scratched his head. He roughly remembered that he had seen a palace in winding flame through the colorful spectrum earlier on in the cave. For a moment, Lin Li was puzzled in spite of himself. Was the flame in the distance the place where the palace was situated? Hey! It's daybreak. You 2 guys are still asleep? Lin Li deliberated for a moment, and decided to go and have a look first. But before that, he had to wake up the 2 guys who were lying on the ground. Hell, Argus staggered up from the grass. He looked up at the distant woods, then at the sky-high fire, and finally his eyes stopped on Lin Li. All of this made Argus weep, without tears. He felt that no one could be more unlucky than himself in this Fire Plume Ridge. It should be an easy and joyful assassination, but he had implicated himself in it in the end. A level 16 archmage was beaten into disfigurement by a level 10 warrior, and then he had lost most of his mana. He was probably worse off than a magic shooter at present. Hell, 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 hell. This is living hell. Argus was depressed mad at the thought of this. However, he dared not utter a sound at all. The two fellows before him did not know what sympathy was, especially the one who had died and came back to life. Shivers ran down his spine at the thought of how merciless they were. Argus could sense it clearly when the bolt was plunged into him. If possible, that fellow would not hesitate to plunge the bolt straight into his heart. The reason why they kept his life was merely because he had some value. Shut up. Lin Li had no time to be concerned with how Argus thought of him. After shooting a glare at the fellow, he proceeded to wake Sean up from the ground. Sean, watch after this fellow. Don't let him go anywhere. Yes. Sean nodded, and carried out Lin Li's order meticulously. It didn't matter that he was methodistic, but Argus nearly lost his mind. For the honest Sean, there was only one way to watch after Argus, that was to hold him firmly and carry him like a bag of goods on his shoulder. Only in this way could he not run around freely. It would not take much for Sean, who was nearly 2 meters tall and stronger than a magical beast, but Argus couldn't even shed a tear if he wanted. A level 16 archmage was carried over the shoulders like a bag of goods. How was he going to stand before others in the future? The three of them, or it should be, 2 of them and a bag of goods, walked towards the place on fire. As he passed through the green grassland, Lin Li could clearly feel that as he got closer to the fire, the torrent of elements ring on his hand was getting hotter and hotter. It actually felt as if it were roasted by fire at the end. This peculiar feeling made Lin Li all the more confused. From the Sunset Mountains to the Shadow Glen, and then from the Shadow Glen to the Fire Plume Ridge, the torrent of elements ring was becoming stranger by the time. At the beginning, it only created an element channel that allowed him to win the duel in Daylight Square. However, in the Shadow Glen, the Lich had called it the Butcher's Ring. When they arrived at the Fire Plume Ridge, the ring had turned even more restless. There was an unusual breath surrounding it on the whole. Lin Li was utterly dumbfounded when the three of them crossed the green grassland and stood in front of the blazing fire. Could this be the Mountain of Inferno in the myths? The verdant grass stretched from the foot to the far end of the horizon. Lin Li looked up and saw a ball of fire burning in the sky, like an infinitely close sun. A blistering heat and powerful magical wave was radiating out unscrupulously from the fire. An edifice hovered quietly in the sky. Fuck. Lin Li rubbed his eyes violently. He thought he had to have seen it wrong. Nothing had changed, the fire was still burning, the huge building was still floating. It was really a floating edifice. Lin Li was dumbstruck by the sudden finding. The luxurious and extravagant architectural style was definitely one unique to the Dark Ages. If he remembered correctly, this was probably the legendary Sky Castle, the peak of the High Elves' architectural art. At the end of the remote Dark Ages, the entire High Elves clan fell into a frenzy. Almost all High Elves believed that they were the most perfect of creatures, and that they were living gods. In the legend of the High Elves, the palaces of the gods were above the vault of heaven. Hence, they made use of their magic civilization, which had been developed to its peak, to create 7 floating cities. These 7 sky castles represented the 4 elements of earth, fire, water, and wind, and the 3 factions of light, darkness, and chaos. In their legend, the world was made up of these 7 rules. Even from the present perspective, these 7 sky castles could be described as true miracles. The extreme extension of imagination and the perfect combination of architectural and magic art had created these 7 unprecedented miracles. Unfortunately, the war that happened afterwards destroyed everything. 6 of the 7 sky castles had fallen. The only one that was still standing had also retreated into the cracks of time and space with the last warriors of the High Elves in the last battle. There had been no news from them for 1,200 years. The day's experience had gone far beyond the scope of Lin Li's understanding. Even if he had the ability to foresee the future, he probably would never think that he could see such a fearful thing after a disaster. Of course, this wasn't a real sky castle. Compared with the real sky castle, this edifice was at most the tip of the iceberg. The 7 almost invincible fortresses of war were much larger than the edifice before them. In the distant Dark Ages, the Sky Castle was also known as the Castle That Never Falls. With the support of magic civilization at its peak, one Sky Castle could even destroy a country. 1,200 years later, most of the facts had disappeared in the long river of time, but various signs showed that although the coalition forces had won the war back then, they had most likely used some shady means to fight against the 7 Sky Castles. But one thing was certain. The edifice was essentially the same as the Sky Castle. It was also powered by elemental forces and built with magical materials. The burning fire was the power source of this palace. Judging from the blood-red color, the main material of this edifice was probably the infernal magic iron that Lin Li longed for. If Lin Li's memory served him well, the glaze on the roof that was similar to a dragon scale was likely polished by the sun's crystal of general size. This luxurious architectural style drove Lin Li insane just thinking about it. Whether it was the infernal magic iron or the sun's crystal, they were all precious magical materials. But here, they were used as construction materials. Such a huge palace would have consumed enough materials to buy a city if it had been converted into gold coins. From what Lin Li saw, luxurious was no longer adequate to describe it. Hell, Argus lay on Sean's shoulder, his eyes were glazed and his expression was dull. Although Argus looked ghastly in his current state, he was once a level 16 archmage. How could he not even know what Lin Li knew? It was possible that he knew better than Lin Li what a floating palace meant. Of the 3, perhaps only Sean could remain calm. He did not have any idea about magical materials, let alone what the Sky Castle was. In his eyes, it was probably just a weird building, just like the Emerald Tower in Gerosa City. When Lin Li stood there, the torrent of elements ring on his hand was searing. Lin Li even felt this strange ring was struggling desperately to be rid of his control and rush up to the blazing fire in the sky. When Lin Li clenched his fist, he could even hear a voice in his heart constantly urging himself, "Go up, go up. Sean, take off your leather armor." Lin Li gritted his teeth fiercely. He decided to go up and see it anyway. If he did not take a look at a palace like this, he was afraid that he would be tortured by curiosity in time to come. ORH. Sean did not question, and took off his leather armor right away, baring his toned muscles. Sean tried to take off his gloves as well after handing the leather armor to Lin Li, but was stopped. No need for the gloves. The leather armor is enough. Lin Li took the leather and put it on his back just to hide the spot that was torn by the devouring beast. The 4 elements of earth, water, fire and wind could provide the power for the Sky Castle to function. The magnificent palace before them was obviously powered by fire, which was the fruit of the High Elf civilization. The magic power contained in it was far beyond ordinary people's ability to endure. Fortunately, Lin Li was wearing fire-salamandered leather armor. As long as it could cover the area torn off by the devouring beast, he could even dive in magma. After putting the leather armor on his body, Lin Li opened the ring of endless storm, and achingly pulled out half of the incomplete Black Lotus. At the sight of the partial Black Lotus, Lin Li couldn't help but glare at Argus. His bitter and hateful eyes immediately frightened Argus, but he couldn't understand why this cruel fellow should look at himself with such freakish eyes. Fortunately, Lin Li did not intend to settle the score with him for the time being. After glaring at Argus, he pulled out 2 glass bottles and some strange herbs from his pocket, and began to busy himself. However, that was only temporary. That was half a Black Lotus, not half a black bread. It put Lin Li's teeth on edge to think about it. How could he possibly let Argus off easily? If this fellow hadn't pushed him into a corner, how could he have used half a Black Lotus? They were in a fierce battle. Moreover, the conditions were crude, so there was no supplementary ingredient at all. He could only roughly concoct a bottle of vibrant potion using the natural heat of the fire plume ridge. Strictly speaking, it couldn't even be called a potion. It was just a mash of dracaena grass and half a black lotus, slightly heated up by the natural high temperature in the fire plume ridge and swallowed by Lin Li in one gulp. He had no choice, Argus was coming too close on him at that time. The power of a level 16 archmage was something Lin Li could not compete against. In an impasse like this, being able to keep his life was the heavens having mercy on him. Where would he get the time to concoct a bottle of perfect vibrant potion? Such a waste, such a waste. Lin Li felt his liver ache at the thought of it. This was not concoction of a potion, this was a crime. Half a black lotus had produced such a teeny bit of vibrant potion. If there was ample time and supplementary ingredients, he could prepare 10 bottles of vibrant potion with the same black lotus, and it'd be far more effective than the bit of succus earlier on. However, this was the only way. Lin Li had decided to do so from the start of the battle. He had no other choice. The disparity of up to 3 levels had exceeded Lin Li's limit. Apart from the vibrant potion, which could bring about a short-term magic immunity, Lin Li could not think of any other way to overcome this unequaled strong opponent. From the beginning of the battle, Lin Li never thought about defeating Argus with strength. His bet was all on the vibrant potion. He seemed to have no ability to fight back, when, in fact, he was doing shady things on the sly. Almost every respite was taken advantage of by Lin Li. He quietly extracted the succus, used the temperature to heat it, and finally stuffed it into his mouth quietly. To be honest, this was probably Lin Li's most unsuccessful concoction since he'd become a pharmacist. Half a black lotus was used to make this pinch of vibrant potion, and it was an inferior product, no less. If it were other times, he would have been so embarrassed that he'd bang his head on the wall. But it was precisely this inferior product that saved his life. If it weren't for this inferior product, Lin Li would have been killed by the 10 arcane missiles. How else would he be here alive and kicking at present? After 10 arcane missiles, the outcome was already decided. Sean's outburst was just an accident. Even without the earth-shaking disaster and the sudden outburst of Sean, Lin Li still had 100% confidence in defeating Argus. The vibrant potion would bring about 10 seconds of magic immunity. For a magic shooter, 10 seconds could do too much. This was the secret of Lin Li's resurrection. Although Argus was an archmage, and also dabbled in some knowledge of pharmacy, how could he possibly imagine confronting a pharmaceutics guru? Not to mention Argus not being able to imagine what Lin Li had done, perhaps even Anduin would not comprehend his actions as well. He could still concoct a potion in the fierce battle and crude environment where he could easily lose his life at any time. Whom was he kidding? Of course, Lin Li had no interest in explaining the complicated process even if Argus wanted to know. He secretly took note of the grudge. When he had the time, he'd have to have a good talk with this Mr. Argus. Before that, he'd have to concoct the gliding potion first. The succus of the rootless grass was extracted, which looked somewhat turbid in the sparkling beaker. Lin Li released the flaming hands as he swiftly put several black lotus petals into the beaker. The whole process was astonishingly fast. As soon as his fingers moved, the turbid succus had boiled up. Almost at the same time, several black lotus petals fell into it, instantly emitting a hazy white mist. Although the gliding potion was a guru-grade potion, its preparation process was not complicated at all. The only thing required of it was speed. The rootless grass contained very unstable properties, especially when heated. It might result in failure if he was any slower. However, this was not a big problem for Lin Li. A pharmacist who had broken through the realm of a pharmaceutics guru was technically perfect. Even if he had attained the realm of a divine smith, he would no longer have much room for improvement. The difference between a guru and a divine smith lay in the understanding of the essence of pharmaceuticals, not in the superiority of skills. A bottle of gliding potion could not astound Lin Li at all. He had already finished the bottle of guru-grade potion in a dazzling moment. The sky-blue mist permeated the beaker, looking like a scene in the dreams. The gliding potion in the beaker was separated into 2 parts, one was stored in a glass bottle, and the other was left in the beaker until it was cooled. For a distance of less than 100 meters, half a bottle of gliding potion would be sufficient. Using too much was simply a waste. When Lin Li poured it into the glass bottle he had prepared long beforehand, Argus was completely stupefied. He couldn't follow what the fellow was doing. He knew the beaker and the herbs, but what was it about putting the herbs into the beaker and heating them with the flaming hands? Argus first squeezed out a somewhat ingratiating smile, and after confirming that Sean would not do anything to him for the time being, asked cautiously, What is he doing? Concocting a potion, replied Sean with a proud expression on his face. Even a dull-witted man like him knew how prestigious it was to be a pharmacist's attendant. Argus was flabbergasted. If he hadn't thought that he was a ruined man now, he would have spat on this big lubber. Fuck, need you be so insulting? I am a level 16 archmage at the very least, and have received high education in magic. Although I am a bit wretched now, my IQ is still above average. You're calling it concoction of a potion, just squeezing some succus out into the beaker and heating it with the flaming hands? Then, can I just lie on the ground and say I've raped the goddess of the earth? This lubber is indeed not in the right mind. Argus looked at Sean, and then at Lin Li, who was in the distance. He admired the fact that it was not easy for two madmen to get together. And then, he was dumbstruck, for he suddenly saw that madman called Felix pouring the liquid from the beaker into his mouth. God, he really drank it, Argus was confounded. Is this guy really a fool? He had taken out a few strange herbs and heated them up with the flaming hands, pouring it directly into his mouth. Does he really think he's some potion master? Meanwhile, there was a slight jubilation in Argus' heart. Drink it, drink it. It'll be best if something untoward should happen. Then, I'd have a chance to escape. Unfortunately, before he could figure out how to run away, Lin Li had taken flight. Hell. Before Argus' glazed eyes, a gust of wind suddenly rose, and then he saw the fellow suspected of mental disorder steering the gust, flying to the blazing palace in the sky at an astonishing speed. This. What's going on? Argus was so taken aback that he plopped down on the ground and almost went insane on the spot. He rubbed his eyes desperately, trying to prove that his eyes were blurry. Are you kidding me, a flying magic shooter? Then, Argus realized that his eyes were not blurred. The insane fellow had turned into a black spot, and landed gently on the steps of the blazing palace. Lin Li could feel the extreme temperature even when he was wrapped in 2 layers of fire-salamandered armor. When he landed on the steps, he could vividly sense a huge magical wave emanating from the depths of the palace. It was a kind of near-substantive pressure, like a huge rock on his body. No matter how he struggled, he could not straighten his back. As soon as Lin Li landed on the steps, he knew that things were not looking good. The pressure was so immense that even with the strength of a magic shooter, there was no room for resistance at all. Bloody hell, something's weird. Countless thoughts turned in Lin Li's mind in this instant. He even wanted to leave this ghost of a place immediately while the effective gliding potion was still there. In his moment of hesitation, the torrent of elements ring on his hand gave off a dazzling light all of a sudden. Lin Li felt the pressure lift from his body at once when the dazzling light was released. The enormous pressure a while ago promptly softened. Although it still could not be resisted, the feeling it brought to Lin Li was totally different. It was full of hostility earlier on, but presently it seemed extremely gentle. He even heard a voice coming from the depths of the palace, constantly calling out to him. Subsequently, the bright red door opened without notice. A red carpet extended from the depths of the palace until it reached Lin Li's feet. When he stepped on it with some uneasiness, he felt as if he had stepped on fine silk. The palace was a magnificent sight. There were pure gold candlesticks, bright silver decorations, and moonstone floor tiles so shiny and smooth that they could even reflect a strand of hair clearly. Everything in the palace was full of luxury. When Lin Li walked along the red silk, he felt as if he were in a dream. Such extravagant decorations should not appear in reality at all. Look at the diamonds embedded in the ceiling. From a distance, he could only see a patch of glitters, just like stars in the night sky. Under the bright starlight, there was something even more dazzling. It was a golden hammer. When Lin Li saw it, he knew what was the origin of the pressure he had felt before right away. It was from the golden hammer. The unending magical waves that emanated from it made Lin Li, who was close to the realm of an archmage, tremble. The power contained in it was so powerful that it gave Lin Li a feeling it was no less than the strength of a legendary mage. Whether it was the powerful Macklin or Argus, who had once put him in despair, it was a difference between a firefly and the sun when put in comparison with the hammer. Lin Li felt dampness in his palms as he walked towards the hammer, stepping on the soft red carpet. The hammer was lying there quietly. Lin Li only had to bend down to hold it in his hands. Despicable. Do you have manners or not? How dare you grope others so casually? At that moment, Lin Li really thought he had encountered a ghost. Why are you spacing out? Aren't you going to put me down? For a moment, Lin Li was wide-eyed and dazed. He stared at the hammer that was desperately struggling in his hand, and after a long while, he stuttered, It's you who's talking? Duh. The hammer scoffed as it struggled violently again. Hey, did you hear me? Yes, I hear you, Lin Li nodded distractedly, but did not loosen his grip at all. Instead, he clutched the hammer tighter in his hand. This was probably what it meant by there are all kinds of fish in the sea. Lin Li was totally thrown off balance. Before picking up the hammer, who would have thought that it could not only jump, but also swear at people? Lin Li was at a loss as he held it in his hand. Hey! Oh. Put you down, right? Lin Li snapped back into composure after being urged for another time, and he quickly put the hammer down. After a careful deliberation of words, he asked with a cautious look on his face, How do I address you? Mr. Hammer, or, what Mr. Hammer? That sounds awful. Mr. Hammer seemed to be in a good mood after being put down. Although there was still some dissatisfaction in his tone, he did not swear. He merely told Lin Li in discontentment, You can call me Moradin. By the way, lad, you look like a human being? Yes, I am a human being. Weird. How did a human come here? Aren't they all hanged by Osric, that moron? Oh. Oh what? Lin Li was so startled that he stammered as he talked. You mean Osric? You know High Lord Osric? Duh. Lin Li almost bit his tongue when the words reached his ears. Then, what's this place? This is the Eternal Furnace, the private smithy of Osric. Lin Li only felt a constant buzz in his head in that moment. He finally remembered. There was a story in Osric's legend. In his later years, the amazing High Lord became interested in forging techniques. So, he sent the Magic Legion to conquer the Dark Iron Dwarves. Countless Dark Iron Dwarfs craftsmen were sent to his palace to demonstrate forging techniques day and night. The High Lord had attained the level of the Master of Forging in just a short year. There had always been a rumor circulating in Amril, Osric, when conquering the Dark Iron Dwarves, also took away the Thor's hammer, a sacred relic that the dwarf clan had inherited from generation to generation. Moradin. Didn't this name mean Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, in Kuzdal one? Lin Li felt his scalp go numb abruptly as he stared at the bizarre hammer. Now you know. Perhaps it was because Moradin hadn't spoken to anyone for a long time, but it seemed very excited at present. After triumphantly showing off, he began to engage in a talk with Lin Li. Oh, yes, how did you get the Brand of Dusk? Brand of Dusk? Lin Li paused, looking bewildered. What is that? Bloody hell, you don't have the Brand of Dusk? Moradin cursed, sounding exasperated. Then how did you get past the Gates of Ashes? What is the Gates of Ashes? Lin Li scratched his head. He was in confusion when he suddenly recalled the moment when he'd passed through the colorful spectrum, and his expression froze. He raised his right hand unbelievably and flashed the Torrent of Elements ring that was shining with a faint light. The Brand of Dusk you mean, is this? Yes, Moradin uttered a cry of alarm as soon as the Torrent of Elements ring was flashed. For a moment, even his words were incoherent. It's really with you, the Brand of Dusk is really with you. Heavens! I am saved at last. This thing is important to you? Lin Li looked at Moradin strangely. The bizarre hammer was trembling slightly because it was too excited. Too important. After a long silence, Moradin suddenly said, "Lad, let's do a deal." "What deal?" "The brand of dusk is very important to me. I need to borrow it. Rest assured, you won't be lending it in vain. In exchange, I can help you get powerful magical equipment." At this point, Moradin asked casually, "By the way, you should be a warrior, right?" Lin Li took a glance at the fire salamandered armor he was wearing, and nodded without a change in countenance. "That's right. Well, if you will lend me the brand of dusk, I'll get you a weapon forged by the dark-iron dwarves." "You're reading on.com, thanks." Lin Li hesitated. It was not that he refused to lend it, but he could not figure out what Moradin wanted to do. Moradin was somewhat anxious seeing Lin Li had kept silent for long. 2 magical equipment pieces, 1 weapon and 1 armor. This should do now, right? Let me think about it. Half an hour passed, Lin Li was still deliberating. Moradin was getting impatient. "Hey, have you thought about it? Don't rush. This is a big matter, I have to think it through." Lin Li had not thought it through, indeed. If it was in the past, he'd have lent the brand of dusk without a second word. It was only a loan, and he did not stand to lose, anyway. In return, he could receive 2 magical equipment pieces forged by the dark-iron dwarves. Such a cost-effective deal wouldn't always happen. However, this time, Lin Li was really hesitant about it. The day's encounter was too strange. Whether it was the colorful spectrum or the floating palace in the sky, everything was shrouded in a peculiar aura. Lin Li had to be extra cautious when making decisions like that. "Oh, right. Moradin, have you been here for 1,200 years? The mage, that's right." When Moradin finished, it suddenly exclaimed, "Wait, what did you say just now? 1,200 years? You mean 1,200 years have passed?" "Yes, it's been 1,200 years since the Dark Ages." "Why, don't you know?" "Hell. It's been such a long time." After grumbling for a while, Moradin asked Lin Li curiously, "Is the war over?" "It's long over. All the high elves, including Osric, are gone. Now humans rule the world of Anrel." "Then, what about the dark-iron dwarves?" "There are no dark-iron dwarves." Lin Li shook his head, and told Moradin everything he saw in the books. The dark-iron dwarves were exterminated right at the beginning of the war. In Anrel, there has not been a living dark-iron dwarf for 1,200 years. Strange, before the Magic Legion came, didn't a group of dark-iron dwarfs escape? Did Osric also? Moradin's words sounded like a soliloquy. "I'm afraid this group of dark-iron dwarves did not escape from the Magic Legion." Lin Li had not spoken without thinking. Everyone knew that the dark-iron dwarves were born blacksmiths. They had an innate talent for forging. Almost every adult dark-iron dwarf could attain a higher tier of mastery in forging. If they really did escape, how could there be no rumors about them in Anrel for 1,200 years? Even if the talent of these dark-iron dwarves were any worse, shouldn't there be at least dozens of smithing masters in these 1,200 years? Once there was a blacksmith of the mastery level, unless they had been isolated from the world for 1,200 years, it was impossible to have no hearsay about them at all. Look at the present Alana and you'd know. How did the sword sage of the storm get his fame in Felon? In addition to his own strength, it was largely due to him being a smithing master. If there were really such a group of dark-iron dwarves, when would it be the Marathon family's turn to be so arrogant? They'd be crushed by the big group of smithing masters long ago. That's really strange. I clearly remembered they escaped. Maybe they were found later. Lin Li had little interest in the life and death of the dark-iron dwarves, and did not want to go on at it any longer. After a casual mention, he took the topic elsewhere. Perhaps it was because Moradin had something to ask from Lin Li, but it had answered all the questions the latter had. Whatever Lin Li asked, as long as Moradin knew the answer, it would give a satisfactory one almost all the time. From the conquest of the dark-iron dwarves to the establishment of the eternal furnace, Lin Li had read most of the stories in books, but how could it compare to hearing from Moradin in person? It was all its personal experience, regardless of the details or the degree of authenticity of the stories. It was far beyond what the books could match. Lin Li's jaw dropped at the mention of all the details from behind the scenes. No one knew why Osric was interested in forging, and no one knew why he built the eternal furnace. Everything looked like a farce. The High Lord suddenly took interest in studying forging, so there was the tragedy of the Dark Iron Dwarves. The Magic Legion rode lightning down from the sky and conquered the Dark Iron Dwarves overnight. At the same time, they took away their sacred relic, the Mjolnir, that had been passed down for thousands of years. At the mention of this, Moradin chuckled impudently. Hee, it's fine with me. Anyway, I was only a sacred relic with the Dark Iron Dwarves. It was a good thing following Osric, at least I could have more contact with precious magical metals. Lin Li rolled his eyes and thought, this fellow has a gift for betrayal. In the years that followed, Moradin did come into contact with innumerable precious magical metals. With Osric's power and status, he could get almost all the magical metals he wanted, including the infernal magic iron, which Lin Li yearned for. Then came the construction of the eternal furnace. Moradin followed beside Osric and participated almost in the whole construction process. 1,200 years on, there was probably no one who knew more about the eternal furnace than Moradin. Lin Li was not wrong. The eternal furnace did adopt the technology of the Sky Castle. The magical crystal of a fire dragon provided the source of power for the eternal furnace to operate. The complex magewefts intertwined, restricting and influencing each other, bringing this purest fire magical element into full play. The whole eternal furnace was like a precision machine. Even a hairline mistake might render the whole construction useless. The technology used in this process had exceeded the limit of human resources. Even the brilliant Osric couldn't do it alone. In order to build an eternal furnace, he had used up almost all the manpower and material resources in his hands. In just 3 years, Osric had squandered enough money to buy the whole Felon Kingdom at present. Did you see that corridor in front of you? From there, it takes about 10 minutes to reach the core of the eternal furnace. There is a real melting furnace there, no flame, no smoke, only the purest fire magical element directly supplied by the dragon's crystal. The magical metals it produces are almost perfect, and there will never be a trace of impurities in it. Look to your right, there's a showroom storing all of Osric's works. To be honest, this bastard was really a genius. The magical equipment he forged were all of the mastery level. Unfortunately, he died too early. If he were to live for a few more years, he could be a smithing guru, for all one knows. So impressive? Lin Li gave a start of surprise. He was about to open the door when he was stopped by Moradin. Don't go, you're out of luck. You came too late. The stuff had been carried away by him 1,200 years ago, including those precious minerals and the mountain of gold. This time, Lin Li understood. Lin Li recalled Jirian telling him about it back in Gerosis. No one knew what happened, but the High Lord had actually built a large tomb for himself in his later years. Lin Li remembered now that Moradin had mentioned it. The things here were probably moved to the tomb. It was not only a human custom to bury valuables with them. Otherwise, I could give you 2 of them. Moradin finally lost his patience as he spoke. Hey, I say, have you thought it through or not? Can you at least give me a reply? Are you going to lend me the Brand of Dusk? I won't treat you unfairly. You could get 2 powerful pieces of magical equipment in exchange. You had better think carefully. These were forged by the Dark Iron Dwarves. Don't regret missing this opportunity in the future. It's not a problem lending it to you, but I'm not interested in magical equipment. Then, what are you interested in? Lin Li was waiting for this sentence. He chuckled, and finally revealed his purpose. Hee, to tell you frankly, I am very interested in the magical crystal of the fire dragon. If you can get it for me, not to mention lending you the Brand of Dusk, I can even give it to you. That won't do. Moradin gave up, and firmly rejected Lin Li. The magical crystal of the fire dragon is not only the source of power for the eternal furnace, but also maintains the operation of the entire world of void. Without it, the world of void will collapse immediately. By then, not only the eternal furnace will disappear, I'm afraid you and I. What world of void? Lin Li was confounded. Hell, Moradin cursed, and its tone was not without frustration. Did you not notice that this is not the original world at all? Moradin's words finally reminded Lin Li of a possibility. For a while, his face turned white in horror, and he swallowed his saliva with much difficulty. You mean to say, the location of the eternal furnace is actually within a certain dimensional space? Duh. Fuck, Lin Li almost lost his mind. Then, how do I get out? HNG, you'll have to depend on me. Depend on you? That's right, lend me the brand of dusk, and I will have the means to bring you out of here. For real or not, Lin Li glanced at it with some doubt in his eyes. I'll tell you the truth, the brand of dusk is the key to the gates of ashes. Only by grasping this key can we move freely between the two worlds. Otherwise, you will be burned to ashes right away by the gates of ashes. Gates of ashes. At this, Lin Li recalled the colorful spectrum again, and his face turned pale for a moment. Is the gates of ashes you mentioned a colorful spectrum? Have you seen its power? Indeed, Lin Li nodded. He did witness the power of the gates of ashes. A level 15 magical beast was turned into ashes in an instant. Such a power was at least of the legendary level. Great that you've seen it. Now, you should have thought it through? Yes. Lin Li nodded obediently, and then uttered something that almost angered Moradin to death. I've decided not to lend. Fuck. Moradin was so angry it almost jumped. Damn you, lad, you're taking me for a ride? You can lie to me for half a day, why can't I take you for a ride? You'd better give me a good reason. How did I lie to you? Although Moradin's tone was strong, there was a hint of guilt in its voice. How did you lie? Lin Li slowly bent down, and took Moradin in his hand again. Indeed, the brand of dusk is the key to the gates of ashes. But you're not simply trying to pass the gates of ashes by borrowing the brand of dusk from me, right? Oh, yes. I forgot to tell you something. Lin Li held the hammer, and smiled as if he was up to no good. Other than being an incompetent warrior, I am also a blacksmith. You know what is a blacksmith, right? So, I advise you to be more honest. If you were to piss me off, I will throw you into the furnace and see if the legendary Mjolnir can be melted. After Lin Li finished his sentence, the hammer in his hand stopped struggling. After a while, Lin Li then heard a hoarse voice. You. What do you want to know? Your origins. Lin Li grinned after speaking, and kindly reminded, take note, your true origins, not some damned Mjolnirs. I really don't know what you are thinking. Do you not know how to look in the mirror before pretending to be Mjolnir? Look at yourself, you are so dirty. It's worse than those prostitutes that have worked for tens of years. You still dare to call yourself a relic of the dark iron dwarfs? Do you have no shame? Forget it, enough nonsense. Just be more honest, I am not that patient. You're right, I am not the relic. After being silent for a while, the hammer finally spoke. I am just a trapped soul. Lin Li nodded, signaling it to continue. There is one thing that I need to clarify. With regards to the brand of dusk on your hand, I really wanted to borrow it only. I have no ill intentions. This time the hammer started to be honest, maybe, because it was scared of being thrown into the furnace. Before answering Lin Li's question, it did not forget to justify itself. My origin is a very long story, and it has nothing much to do with this issue. If you really want to know, I can tell you one last time. Before this, you can call me Kanoris. This was my name before I got killed by Osric. Okay then, Kanoris. First tell me, what is your goal for wanting this brand of dusk? I needed to control the eternal furnace. It can control the eternal furnace? Yes, you should know of the history of the brand of dust. It belongs to High Lord Osric. As far as I know, this ring had never left his side when he was alive. Even though it has been 1,200 years, it still contains a sliver of Osric's mental strength. In a certain way, It can be said that it is the inheritance of the High Lord's mental brand. This is also the reason why you could pass through the gates of ashes unscathed. That sliver of mental strength is still around? Lin Li was a little suspicious. He remembered that before the battle with Cromwell, he had fused with a spiritual brand, which resulted in understanding the ring's secret. Logically speaking, magical equipment should not have two spiritual brands. Otherwise, there would be complications, just like with adultery. Are you trying to say that you've also left your own spiritual branding on it as well? Kanoris did not answer directly, but instead questioned Lin Li back. Yes. This isn't actually contradictious. If I am not mistaken, what you have is just an incomplete brand of dusk, and you only have small part of its strength in your grasp. Osric's spiritual brand is still asleep within the brand of dusk. Otherwise, your strength wouldn't degrade to this state. It is unassuming to say that being able to control the power of the brand of dusk would be equivalent to being another Osric. F***ck, it's that strong? With Kanoris' words, Lin Li almost bit his tongue. Back then, in the Nightmare Mountains, Lin Li already knew that it was formidable magical equipment, but he dared not imagine that this thing was actually this strong. What was it like to be another Osric? He was a person that could go against 7 legendary powerhouses alone and still come out on top. If this power were to be obtained, it would not be a fantasy to make a clean sweep of the Felon Kingdom with just the wave of a hand. I know you do not believe it, but the truth is that it really is that strong. Honestly speaking, I died to the power of the brand of dusk 1,200 years ago. Forget it, let's not talk about this. Kanoris seemed to be feeling down after getting to this point, as it probably invoked sad memories. After being silent for a while, he continued speaking. Actually, this is also the reason why I want to borrow this brand of dusk from you. What is it? It can release me from this damned hammer and also give me a new body at the same time. A new body? That's right. Kanoris' voice felt somewhat pleased. Let me tell you now, this is a real secret. Other than Osric, only I know about it. After my soul has been trapped for tens of years, I have somewhat seen everything that Osric had done. Furthermore, he was not weary of me. Sometimes, he would even tell me his thoughts, and this secret is what Osric told me himself. Lin Li subconsciously held his breath. He believed that he was going to hear a world-shaking secret. The real eternal furnace is not used for forging, but for creating lives. What did you say? Lin Li almost spat out his saliva. How much do you understand about the High Elves? Kanoris still replied with a question. High Elves? Lin Li was questioned till he was baffled. He tried recalling for a long while before he could regurgitate what he had read from the books. He even added on a few of his own points. This discussion lasted for about 10 minutes. These lunatics, they thought that they are gods. Finally, Lin Li concluded with this sentence. That's why the eternal furnace came about. Kanoris' voice was calm. Lin Li swallowed his saliva hard. Are you trying to tell me that the reason for Osric creating the eternal furnace is to prove that he is a god? You're correct, he's mad. He wasn't crazy. Kanoris' voice was resonant, but it was abnormally affirmative. Indeed, the twilight years of Osric did see many unthinkable things. Killing tens of thousands of humans in a night. Dominating the dark iron dwarves due to a spur in interest and building a gigantic mausoleum for himself. But, I can confidently tell you that Osric was not crazy. It was the opposite, he was more sober than ever during his twilight years. Do you know why he killed those hundreds of thousands of humans? How would I know? Lin Li rolled his eyes. He thought to himself, I am a normal person, how could I comprehend what a monster like Osric was thinking? It was because creating life needed a large sample of souls. Monster. You're right, he was indeed a monster, Kanoris excitedly scolded, but then he sighed. But you have to admit that Osric was not a normal freak. Even I thought that creating life was impossible at that point of time. But nobody would have thought that Osric would almost succeed within 10 years. Lin Li frowned. Why was it almost? Because, strictly speaking, the things he created cannot be called life. What did he create? I am not sure what it was as well. Kanora's answer was mysterious. I only know that after failing, Osric had neuroticism. He often experienced an episode of mania mysteriously. Many an important member of the Magic Legion was killed by him during that period. After he cooled down, Osric would kneel down in front of the bodies to repent in regret. When he was in regret, the sentence he said the most was, "Sorry, it's not that I want it to be this way. But he is returning soon." The he that Osric was referring to, who is it? I don't know, Osric never mentioned it before. I only remember that after failing in creating life, Osric seemed to have changed into a different person, madly plundering the riches of other races and using them to build the enormous mausoleum. You've heard of that mausoleum, right? During the years of building the mausoleum, hundreds of thousands of people perished. The books of humans should have the records. Yes, I've heard of it. So, do you have any interest in that mausoleum? Kanoris was indeed a monster that had lived with Osric for hundreds of years. He had not forgotten to tempt Lin Li. If you are interested, I can give you some clues in exchange for the brand of dusk. What do you think? No way. Lin Li angrily replied. This fella made him angry, yet he found it funny. How long had it been, and he had not forgotten to tempt him? Unfortunately, he chose the wrong person to tempt. Lin Li knew how much he himself was worth. Was the mausoleum of the High Lord somewhere that people could just casually enter? Without the power of the Guild of Magic or the Adventurers Guild, there was no need to think about it. All sorts of machines and traps, and maybe countless curses, were waiting. Furthermore, what could a few clues do? If I want clues, I will go look for Macklin. What's the point in exchanging with you? How unfortunate. Kanoris was not dejected after failing in tempting, he just started speaking to himself. On the day that the mausoleum was built, Osric came to the Eternal Furnace for one last time. I saw with my own eyes that he used the earth element essence, a pile of steel, and a mageweth that was so complicated that it was unparalleled to create something that was close to life. What was it? This thing. Kanoris hesitated for a moment. I am also not sure how to describe it. In short, it is just something weird. It had no thoughts or soul, just pure primitive instincts. It even dared to resist its creator, Osric, when he attacked it. Oh, Lin nodded, and did not question further. He had already understood. The essence of earth element, the hardest steel, and a complicated mageweth. Weren't these requirements for creating a soul puppet? Lin Li remembered clearly that a branch of alchemy specialized in creating soul puppets. Accordingly, the soul puppets that were created after attaining the divine smith level could be compared to the ancient titans. However, this had nothing to do with Lin Li. He had never chosen any branch before. From a certain point of view, he was a traditional metallurgist. He was cultivating the path of the king of the metallurgy skill tree. As to why he made this choice, it was to complement epigraphy. As a master of complex epigraphy and metallurgy, it could only be described as nothing was impossible. His knowledge about soul puppets was mostly heard from people in the same trade. He was only an amateur. When it came to something as difficult as creating life, he was not much better than Sean. The biggest weakness of these creations was that they do not have their own souls. But for me, this was the biggest advantage because when I was alive, I devoted myself to the research of souls. Devoted to the research of souls? Lin Li frowned, and doubtfully asked, "You were a necromancer?" No. How could a low-ranking profession like necromancer be befitting of my noble status? Let me tell you something, I used to deal with souls. As long as the price was right, you could discuss with me about all sorts of souls. No matter if it was low-ranked, noble, dirty, or pure. Are you interested? F***ck, demon? Wrong, you should call me the Great Soul Trader. Mr. Kanoris, the philanthropist. PFF, demon means demon. What philanthropist or Great Soul Trader? You deserve to be killed by Osric for doing such an wicked business. You really do not have sympathy. To sympathize with a demon? What kind of joke is this? Look at my current state, can I still be called a demon? You're trying to say that you want to create a soul puppet to transfer your soul into? Yes, yes, yes. So, could you help? I've been waiting for this day for a long while. This damned hammer will be the death of me. I really dream of walking with 2 legs. What benefits can you give me? Kanoris pondered for a long while before he finally decided. If you help me, I will tell the method to control the eternal furnace. No, you will tell me the method to control the eternal furnace, and then I will help you create a new body. This is the proper order, don't be mistaken. Even though he was unwilling, the great soul trader had to lower his noble head in the face of his only chance. Deal. I hope you keep your words. Relax, honesty is the best policy. Even though I am not some damned soul trader, I still run by this principle. Okay, I'll trust you. You can only trust me, Lin Li pouted, and did not show Kanoris any respect. It was obvious that the brand of dusk was its only chance. If it were to miss this opportunity, it would have to wait thousands of years again. With such a long end of the stick, why would Lin Li be polite to it? Anyway, this fellow was a demon, so Lin Li did not feel any remorse for extortion. Both of them walked past the corridor, and quickly arrived in front of tightly shut door. After gently pushing open the tightly shut gates, the scene that Lin Li saw was beyond his expectations. There was not a burning furnace, nor an unbearable temperature. There were only all sorts of bizarre runes, fluttering in the air, like butterflies. Beyond the tightly shut gates was a completely different world. Just standing there made Lin Li feel like he was dreaming. The sky above him was full of stars, and there was a bright and clear moonlight under a bright moon, while under his feet was a bottomless abyss that was a mix of red and black. With the shrilling hells, it was as if blood and darkness were relentlessly entangling together. These 2 different sceneries had perfectly merged together. It was not in the slightest bit abrupt, but, in fact, had a harmonious sense of beauty. How is it? Not bad, right? The great soul trader was abnormally excited. It brought Lin Li into the endless void while proudly showing off. This is the only void crack within Felon. It is in between the abyss and the star world. When Osric was building the eternal furnace, it was me that brought him here. Look below your feet, that is my hometown, the abyss where countless demons reside. Oh, Lin Li nodded, he seemed apathetic. Within a day, he had experienced too much excitement. The assassination of a level 16 archmage, the floating infernal palace, as well as a 1,200-year-old hammer. Oh, yes, within this hammer was a great soul trader. All of these felt like it was a dream. Lin Li thought that since it was a dream, another void crack would be nothing much. With such thoughts, Lin Li followed Kanoris into the void crack. The feeling was really weird as all he saw was a boundless abyss, but it felt like solid ground when he stepped on it. Looking at that endless entanglement of blood and darkness made Lin Li feel curious. The center of the void was crimson red, and when Lin Li approached it, he could clearly see that this crimson red was heavy and palpitating. Dom, dom, dom. Dom, dom, dom. The sound was slow but rhythmic, it was like a strong heartbeat. The numerous rays of crimson red radiating from this heart were entangled like a spider's web. They stretched all the way to the boundaries of the void. This is the heart of the eternal furnace, the magical crystal of a fire dragon. Back in the day, after Osric had caught this fire dragon called Red Fong, he did not kill it immediately. Instead, he constrained it in the void crack, and used a sharp blade to split open its skull, extracting this magical crystal. He then channeled of Red Fong's life force into this crystal when it was on the verge of dying so as to allow it to maintain life. Look at it now, doesn't it look like it's alive? Indeed, Lin Li nodded. The life force that was emitted from this magical crystal was indeed full of vigor. It was like heaven and earth when it was compared to the rock that he had extracted from the dragon of destruction. Look at these now. After Kanoris had finished speaking, it brought Lin Li to the spiderweb. The eternal furnace and that heart are connected by these webs. Enormous amounts of energy are transferred through this and provide energy to operate the eternal furnace. This is also the method for Osric to pass down orders. So, from a certain perspective, this heart is actually the real controller of the eternal furnace. Obtaining it is the same as obtaining the whole eternal furnace. What should I do? Lin Li did not hesitate at all. For him, the temptation of the eternal furnace was too huge. This was related to Osric's secret and a world that was untouched. It was related to a floating castle. In Lin Li's perspective, all of these were filled with a lethal temptation. Just place the hand with the brand of dusk on it. So simple? Lin Li looked at, but did not rush to place his hand. Instead, he reached out and grabbed Kanoris, opening the ring of endless storm at the same time. What are you doing? Kanoris immediately had a shock when it was grabbed. It was especially so when it saw the dark portal that emerged from the ring of endless storm. It was so scared that its voice was shaky. Nothing, Lin Li smiled, and, with an earnest look, explained, this is the magical crystal of a fire dragon. I'm just worried it might hurt you if I stir up something too big. For your safety, I decided to put you into the portal. Relax, other than being a bit dark, it is absolutely safe. What the hell? Put me down, I am not hiding in some damned portal. Mr. Kanoris, please cooperate. This will be better for both of us. You're still suspicious of me. Of course. You operate a soul trading business. Whom else can I be suspicious of? Don't forget, you lied to me once just now and told me that you are the relic of the Dark Iron Dwarves, Moradin. Now, there is a red dragon's magical crystal. How can I know you're not lying to me again? After recounting Kanoris' lies, Lin Li then showed an earnest look again. But don't worry, I am a virtuous person. I won't do anything to you. I'll just place you inside the portal, and release you once it is safe. Really? Of course. However, if anything were to happen to me, don't think about living peacefully. Let me tell you honestly, this ring is called Endless Storm. Whatever secret it has, even I am not clear. I only know that whatever is placed inside, unless I am the one that does it, not even Osric can release you if he is resurrected. After he finished speaking, he affectionately patted Kanoris with his hand. So, Mr. Kanoris, you'd better start praying now that I don't run into any trouble. Otherwise, you better be prepared to stay inside the portal forever. Shameless! Kanoris struggled within Lin Li's hand. Its angry roar seemingly echoed throughout the whole portal. You're actually suspicious of such a kind demon like me. Cut the bullsh *t, Lin Li was too lazy to listen to him. He lifted his hand and shoved it into the ring of endless storm. You. Woo. Kanoris' voice drowned within the ring of endless storm. The void crack immediately became unusually quiet. Other than Lin Li's breathing, there was only the sound of the gigantic heart's beating. Lin Li stood in front of the gigantic heart, feeling the heat that seemed to be palpable. This time, Kanoris was not lying. This was indeed a fire dragon's magical crystal. This was definite. Lin Li could clearly feel the pure yet powerful aura. Only magical beasts that surpassed the legendary level could produce such a terrifying power. Lin Li took a breath, and slowly stretched out his right hand. The brand of dusk on the ring finger started to shimmer. Boom! Just when the right hand had come in contact with the heart, Lin Li heard a loud sound. Following this loud sound, an endless stream of energy started to leak out from the gigantic heart instantaneously like flood waters. It surged towards the brand of dusk, and, in that instant, the brand of dusk that was already scorching became as hot as white-hot iron. It was so hot that Lin Li felt like cutting off his finger. Yet, at the same time, Lin Li's boundless mental strength also seemed to have found an opening, and surged towards the brand of dusk. Two kinds of energy of the same scale were clashing together like Mars crashing into Earth. Suddenly, there was a bloom of a blinding light. Boom! Lin Li seemed to have heard a loud sound. After that, everything was deathly quiet. It seemed like everything had disappeared. The gigantic heart stopped beating, the sky full of stars was now dark. The demonic abyss that was an entanglement of red and black seemed to be blocked by a fog. Even Lin Li could not feel the existence of his body. It was like his soul had separated from his body, leaving behind a weak consciousness, fumbling about with difficulty. There was no sound nor light, just an endless darkness and solitude. Nobody knew how long this state continued for. Maybe a year, or maybe a second. In short, it was under these circumstances that Lin Li suddenly saw a ball of fire rising, and then he felt countless memories entering his brain. These were fragments of memories that were like shattered glass that had been cut up by someone. Some were images, some were voices. There were even some that were a vague feeling. If he wanted to find out what they had in common, then it would still be as messy and incomprehensible. With the surge of the countless fragmented memories entering his brain, Lin Li instantly felt a sharp pain. This pain was at the level far from anything that a human would be able to tolerate. It was like an invisible hand had reached into his brain and relentlessly roiled. The entanglement of the chaotic fragments of memories was like a mess. Both the old and current memories were repelling and swallowing each other. No matter how powerful Lin Li's mental strength was, he almost fainted. He was hugging his head with red eyes and rolling on the floor as if he had went mad. There were consecutive painful groans as pain that had never been felt before was continuously torturing him. This torture went on for a long while before Lin Li finally felt that the fragments of memories that almost drove him mad had finally calmed down. When Lin Li opened his eyes, a thought appeared in his head. So that's what happened. This was a natural realization that was like the time when he used the scroll of wishes. He suddenly felt that he knew all of the life skills thoroughly. It was just that the previous process was more peaceful. This time, it was incomparably painful. Lin Li stood quietly in the void crack, and felt a powerful force that he'd never encountered before. The fusion that took place just now had given him countless fragments of memories, and a strength that was beyond comparison. This strength not only came from the magical crystal of the fire dragon, but also came from the eternal furnace. Only in this moment did Lin Li understand why Kanoris said that if he were to obtain the heart, it would also mean that he had obtained the eternal furnace. It was because both the heart and the eternal furnace were a single entity. The heart was the eternal furnace, and vice versa. When Lin Li left his own spiritual brand on the gigantic heart, all the memories and power that had been accumulated by the eternal furnace for 1,200 years had surged into the brand of dusk like flood waters. This was a process that was repelling and swallowing one another. When the countless fragments of memories had been pieced together, they then formed a complete eternal furnace. Although Kanoris was the only one other than Osric to know of the eternal furnace's existence, even this great soul trader did not know how dangerous the process was. The moment the countless memory fragments surged in, the assault on one's mental strength was far beyond what a human could tolerate. Even Osric, the creator of the eternal furnace, might not be able to tolerate it. Fortunately, Kanoris met Lin Li. The mental strength that was almost unlimited had saved Lin Li's life, avoiding the fate where Kanoris would be trapped in the ring of endless storm for an eternity. When the swallowing and fusion had been completed, Lin Li became the owner of the eternal furnace. It could also be said that Lin Li was the eternal furnace, and the eternal furnace was Lin Li. Through the connection between the brand of dusk and the heart, there was no longer a distinction between him and this enormous sky fortress. The only thing Lin Li needed now was to control this power better. This process might be long, but it was not incomprehensible, because all the methods and skills had filled his brain along with the countless of memory fragments. How is it, Kanoris? Have you gotten used to the portal? Lin Li opened the ring of endless storm and took out the hammer that Kanoris was residing in. What the hell? You dare to treat a great soul traitor in this manner? Kanoris was furious. If the hammer had a mouth, it would have bitten Lin Li. What the hell? You dare to treat a great soul traitor in this manner? Kanoris was furious. If the hammer had a mouth, it would have bitten Lin Li. Am I not doing this for your own good? Lin Li rubbed his nose. He seemed to feel awkward. He might have been in the wrong. The truth had proven that Kanoris had not lied to him. However, it was still awkward. With the thickness of Lin Li's face, he quickly tossed this incident to the back of his mind. He smiled, and asked, "Oh, yes. Mr. Kanoris, I have two pieces of news, one good and one bad." Which one do you want to hear first? I want to hear the good news. Kanoris did not hesitate. Okay, then. Lin Li smiled. Good news is I have the eternal furnace under control. That's great, that's great. Kanoris was trembling in excitement, and repeated that's great twice before doubtfully asking, what about the bad news? The bad news, Lin Li hesitated for a moment, and shrugged his shoulders. The bad news is, currently there is no way for you to change a body. Why? Kanoris' voice suddenly became really sharp. Don't forget that you promised me. F*ck, I didn't forget. Lin Li scolded harshly, but he calmed down soon after. He looked really helpless. The problem is that with my current abilities, I can't do it. I can't do it, do you understand? Then what do we do? It had finally had some hope, but it only got an I can't do it in return. Kanoris was about to burst into tears. I have already been trapped in this damned hammer for 1,200 years. There is nothing I can do, blame it on Osric. It is in the domain of high-level magic, and he even tampered with those core magic rules. Look at me carefully, do I look like a person with legendary power? Lin Li felt unlucky thinking about it. Indeed, the memory fragments did contain information about using puppets to create life, but that was useless for Lin Li. The usage of many spells in the high-level domain and the tampering of the core magic rules were not a domain that normal humans could set foot in. Legendary power was just a conservative estimation made by Lin Li. It would be more reliable to say that this requirement needed a few more levels. Then? What then? Since you've already waited for 1,200 years, waiting another few hundred years would not matter. Let me give you a suggestion since you are just idling around. Why not follow me? You could help me with forging as well. When I have breached the legendary realm, I will make you a new body. What do you think of this idea? Lin Li smiled while speaking, he also glanced at Kanoris. Lin Li actually put in some thoughts about this. No choice, the origin of Kanoris was too tempting. It was a genuine demon, and the home of demons was the legendary abyss. All along, Lin Li was not a person full of desire. There were very few things that could pique his interest. This was especially so after coming to Amril. There were only two things that could interest him. One was to become stronger, this was the only way he could live a better life. The other was getting all sorts of rare materials like Black Lotus or Infernal Magic Iron. For the sake of becoming stronger and obtaining more rare materials, he could go out of his way and do things that he would not normally do, for example, roping in a spirit that was trapped in a hammer. The reason for doing so was because Kanoris used to live in the demon's abyss. This was crucial for Lin Li because other than being dangerous, it was also well known for producing goods in abundance. At least 1/3 of the rare materials that Lin Li dreamed of originated from the demon's abyss. Roping in Kanoris was like roping in a guide. A decent guide in a place like the demon's abyss would help prevent Lin Li from taking wrong path. Therefore, Lin Li was very passionate. He was so passionate that it made Kanoris suspicious. Wait for you to breach the legendary realm? Is there a problem? You're a warrior, Kanoris whispered softly, but what it actually wanted to say was F*ck, wait for you, a level 5 warrior, to breach the legendary realm. It would be more practical for me to sleep for another 1,200 years. Of course, Kanoris smartly swallowed its words after he considered the ring that this fellow was wearing. Speaking of this, I remembered that I forgot to tell you something. What is it? Kanoris was stupefied. Lin Li did not answer, but tightly grabbed Kanoris in his right hand. Instantly, there was searing flame arising. With the casting of flaming hands, it was so hot that Kanoris immediately held. What the hell, you ungrateful bastard? Are you trying to burn me to death? This is what I forgot to tell you. Lin Li took his time in putting Kanoris down. At the same time, he flailed his right hand and put out the flames. Do you still have any questions? What the hell, are you crazy? Kanoris grumbled for a while, before realizing something. It asked with disbelief, You are not a warrior? Duh. It was almost instantly that Kanoris became excited. "You're a mage." "No, no, no. Not a mage, at least an archmage." "What the hell, what a young archmage. How could it be?" Towards the end, Kanoris' voice was so sharp that it seemed like it was being choked. "It's nothing much," Lin Li sounded humble, but he could not conceal the smile on this face. There was no choice, even the city walls would not be able to resist it if he was lucky. Just now, when he branded his spiritual brand on the gigantic heart, his mental strength and the power of the eternal furnace had fused together. Even though he still couldn't fully control this strength at the moment, that brief moment of contact had brought him a great benefit. Lin Li estimated that his strength had risen by 2 levels, and he could clearly feel that it was not just his strength that had increased. There was even a breach in realms. This sensation was too distinct. The difference between a magic shooter and an archmage was like 2 separate worlds. With the status of an archmage, looking at a magic shooter was like an adult looking at a child. Lin Li even felt that with his current strength, he was rather confident of defeating Argus if he were to be assassinated by him again. Furthermore, it'd be through a battle purely based on strength, and not through some other means. Unfortunately, such a thing could only be thought of. Argus had already been destroyed. Even if Lin Li wanted to battle him fairly again, it was not going to happen. "What the hell, you're really an archmage? Do you believe me now?" "Yes, yes, yes," Kanoris' voice was full of exhilaration. The turn of events was too stimulating for it. From being filled with hope to being full of despair, and again from being full of despair to being filled with hope. Swinging back and forth was like being sent from heaven to hell, and then from hell back to heaven. If it had a choice, it would not want to experience it again. "That's great," Lin Li nodded, and did not further excite it. "From now on, you are my private property." "I am Felik, nice to meet you, Mr. Kanoris." "Me too." For unknown reasons, the smile on Lin Li's face made Kanoris feel somewhat guilty. "Oh, yes. Kanoris, I heard that all sorts of magical materials were being produced in the demon's abyss. Could you bring me to take a look one day? It might even be useful when I help to create your body." After inscribing his spiritual brand on the heart, Lin Li did not go anywhere else, not even to the showroom that Kanoris had mentioned. He knew that it would be useless even if he went there. The entire eternal furnace had been cleaned out. Other than the fire dragon's magical crystal and Kanoris, the half-hammer half-demon weirdo, everything else had been sent to Osric's mausoleum. Before leaving the void crack, Lin Li left a trace of mental strength inside the gigantic heart. This allowed him to control the eternal furnace at any time and from anywhere. It did not matter where he was, he could summon the eternal furnace as long as there was the existence of the void crack within the vicinity. For Lin Li, this was the best reward. Compared to having full control of the eternal furnace, breaking through the archmage realm and finding a guide for the demon's abyss were somewhat insignificant. Even though the eternal furnace was now empty, the most essential thing was still there, and it was the technique to build the Sky City. Along with Fire Dragon's magical crystal that maintained the functioning of the eternal furnace, the eternal furnace would still be eternal furnace with these 2 things. With sufficient time, Lin Li would able to reconstruct a real floating castle. The reappearance of the Sky City of the High Elf sounded impossible, but for a master of all professions like Lin Li, the issue was not about technique, he just lacked time and materials. Without a doubt, this would be a long process. The reconstructed eternal furnace would take up an astronomical amount of time and gold, but it would immediately solve all of Lin Li's troubles when completed. Even the Marathon family or the Shadow's Nest would not pose a single hint of threat anymore. Within the current Felon Kingdom, a floating castle from the Dark Ages would be invincible, and this included the legendary Sky Knights. There would not be a single power that could threaten this floating castle. Furthermore, this was a floating castle that was drifting within the void crack. Under the control of the trace of mental strength that had just fused in, Lin Li could summon it anytime and anywhere. Think about it, when the reconstructed eternal furnace appeared above Gerosis, what kind of expressions the people of Shadow's Nest would show. Lin Li's face had a smile when he left the eternal furnace. He stood on top of the red pedestal, and recited a spell quickly before turning around to jump off. This was the first time Lin Li used the levitation spell, so his mana control was still slightly jerky. When he came down from the eternal furnace, he looked as wretched as someone that fell into water. No matter how wretched it was, without a doubt, he was still using the powers of an archmage. The proof was the look on Argus's face. Looking at the figure that slowly descended, Argus' expression was as though he had just swallowed a dead rat. His mouth was so slack that an egg could be shoved into it, and his eyes were wide open, just like a goldfish that was blowing bubbles. He was unable to maintain his composure. Even children knew what the levitation spell meant. This meant extreme control of mana. This meant thorough understanding of magic rules. This also meant the power of an archmage. Argus had always been proud of his achievements. He'd even thought that he was a true magic genius of Felon. He was only 28 years old when he broke through to the archmage realm. Such an achievement was something that even Anduin could not compare to. As for Gryffindor, that had appeared from the Guild of Magic in these past few years, Argus did not hold any regard for him. From Argus's point of view, he was just a lucky flower which bloomed in a greenhouse that was exposed to a dense magical atmosphere from a young age. The people that he saw every day were of the archmage level, and there were archmages patiently guiding him, helping to solve all doubts he might have. Yet, under such an enviable environment, he could only approach the border of the archmage realm, which was far from Argus level. Honestly, Argus looked down on Gryffindor. Compared to Gryffindor, Argus was another extremity. He came from the lowest class in society, and was orphaned at 12 years old. If not because he'd suddenly discovered his talent for magic, he might have been the same as most of the orphans, becoming a thief or hooligan in the messiest streets of Alana. Although he had talent for magic, he'd never had a chance to enter the Guild of Magic. Argus became an adventurer when he was 14, struggling between life and death every day. Within 10 years, he had hunted thousands of magical beasts. He had broken through during a hunt when he was in a dire situation, and this shaped the current Argus. Whatever he had achieved had been stained with red blood, be it from a magical beast, or from his own body. Was Gryffindor able to match up to such an accomplishment? Not only was he not able to match up, there were only a few mages in the whole Felon kingdom that could match up to it. But when Argus saw Lin Li gently descend from the eternal furnace, he was dumbfounded. Argus was much clearer than anyone else who this young mage was. In fact, they had dueled just not too long ago. Indeed, Argus admitted that this was a real genius. He already had the power of a level 13 magic shooter when he had not even reached 20 years old. Such a talent had already surpassed Gryffindor's, and even Argus was surprised. But that was merely a surprise. Argus did not even imagine that just after 2 hours, this level 13 magic shooter would have leapt forward such a large distance and broken through to a realm that many mages had failed to reach, becoming a real archmage. Argus felt that even if he fully recovered, he might not be able to win against this fella in a fair duel. F***ck. Argus looked down, spewing vulgarities. I also do not want to fight against this guy. He even decided that once he returned to Alana, he would sever ties with the Marathon family. No matter how powerful Wilhelm was, he was just a mortal. Offending him would be better than offending a person that broke through to the archmage realm within 2 hours. Who knew what else this fella was still capable of? Mr. Felix, you've returned. Thinking till this point, Argus welcomed him with a smile that was full of flattery. Not bad, Argus. You've improved. Lin Li smiled. He was very clear about what this fellow was plotting. In fact, this was the effect that he had wanted, otherwise, there was no need to fly down with the levitation spell. There was still half a bottle of levitation potion in his pocket. Sean, what are you looking at? Lin Li turned around, and saw Sean look at him with a dull expression. No. Nothing. Sean had a shock. After he stammered in denial, he then weirdly asked, Mr. Felix, you seem to look different. What's the difference? I don't know. It's just different, Lin laughed. Seemed like Sean did not waste time during this period. He could instinctively tell Lin Li's level of strength. 2 months ago, this fellow was still ignorant. Within less than 2 months, he had improved tremendously. It appeared that the master that was guiding him was not someone average. Forget it, let's go. Ah? We have completed the task at the Fire Plume Ridge, we are returning to Alana now. After Lin Li finished speaking, he glanced at the eternal furnace that was in the sky before bringing along the 2 men across the plains to walk towards the Gates of Ashes. Boom! Just when the 3 of them entered the Gates of Ashes, there was a loud sound from the skies. Instantly, the cave started to shake violently, and there were large rocks crashing on their heads amidst the dust. This caused them to be extremely distressed. What the hell? Lin Li spat out. He thought, King Mercenary Corps and King Salamanders did not take any aphrodisiac, so why are they taking so long to finish the battle? Sean, lead the way. Understood. Luckily, there was still Sean as the guide. Although the 3 of them stumbled, almost getting crushed by the falling rocks along the way, they still made it out of the damned cave. After seeing the sunlight again, Lin Li stood at the entrance of the cave, and deeply breathed in the hot air that was unique to the Fire Plume Ridge. He was feeling better than ever. The place that they came out from was near the peak of the Fire Plume Ridge. It was very close to the battle that was in full swing. Without even looking back, they could see the rising flares of the battlefield. Will it ever end? Lin Li looked over, and saw a field of flares rising up. The current Fire Plume Ridge peak was like hell. There was a field of black magical beast carcasses, while thick fresh blood was flowing towards the ridges, evaporating into a dense mist of blood under the searing temperature. The thick scent of blood could be smelled from afar. The 6 Great Mercenary Corps suffered large casualties. There were more than 1,000 adventurers when they ascended the mountain, but now there was less than half left. Furthermore, many of them had severe injuries. From where he stood, Lin Li could see clearly that the ground had piles of coke mixed with blood. As a magician, Lin Li knew that this was the remains of humans being burnt by a powerful fire spell. From atop the spacious peak, there came a deafening roar from the blinding flares. Oh my God, Lin Li only took a glance before realizing what he had just seen. It was the main culprit that caused the earthquake, a beast that had legendary strength. The legendary salamander. The 6 Great Mercenary Corps were still holding on. From Lin Li's position, he could clearly see the heavily armored warriors of Silver Storm using their shields to restrain the salamander's movements to a limited area. They used their sharp swords to slash it, causing blood to splatter from its body that was covered in flames. After that, this legendary beast roared and flailed its tail, which caused a deafening sound to tear through the air. Then, a firestorm descended. Ah! Screams were heard incessantly, so much so that even Lin Li, who was far away, could hear it clearly. The strength of a legendary beast was too terrifying. With just one firestorm, several adventurers have been killed almost instantaneously. Yet, the members of the Silver Storm did not retreat even a single step. This was because they had no way to retreat. Less than 10 meters behind the Silver Storm was the mages unit of the 6 Great Mercenary Corps. Within that area, hundreds of mages were reciting spells hastily, allowing the firestorm to land on the elemental shield. It appeared that the elemental shield's brilliance started to dim, but not a single one of them dared to stop reciting. It was because they knew that this recitation would give them another shot at the salamander. If they were to stop reciting and allow the salamander to finish off the Silver Storm, then only death would await them. The Silver Storm closed in even more, and their sharp swords tore open deep wounds on the salamander. The magicians at the back started to recite their spells even faster. Something bad is happening. Lin Li could clearly see that the 2 small eyes of the salamander started to radiate intense crimson light. The 6 Great Mercenary Corps were in trouble, for this was the sign that the salamander was furious. He had come across this legendary beast once, he of course knew how terrifying it was in its fury. If he were to exaggerate a little, it had the force of a cataclysm. With his current strength, provoking the salamander would mean death. Unless, he had the opportunity to use that weakness. However, such chances were too rare. Even for someone that had hunted a salamander like Lin Li, he had to admit that a chance occurred less than once within 100 times. To able to encounter it once was just sheer luck. Run! Lin Li glanced at the battlefield and the salamander, and made his decision without hesitation. But when he turned around, he heard panting. Lin Li turned and looked in the direction of the sound. He saw a middle-aged man in his 40s carrying his sword while leaning on the rocks and breathing heavily. The middle-aged man seemed like he had just gone through an intense battle. The leather armor that he was wearing had been drenched in sweat and blood. There was a wound stretching all the way from his waist to his lower abdomen, blood oozing out endlessly. The meticulously crafted leather armor had been covered in dirt and ash, causing it to be in a mess. For unknown reasons, Lin Li felt that this middle-aged man was very clean when he first saw him. This weird feeling caused Lin Li to be stunned for a moment, but he quickly realized he had such a feeling because of the man's arms. Even though his whole body was a wreck, his arms were totally clean, including the sword his right hand held onto tightly. There was not a single trace of blood on it. Hello, Lin Li scratched his head awkwardly. The 6 great mercenary corps were putting their lives on the line, yet he was just hiding and watching. Even with Lin Li's shamelessness, he could not help but feel remorse. I was too careless, I need to conceal myself better next time. Ah, hello, the middle-aged man smiled. It could be due to the injuries that he seemed to be in pain while smiling. This was a troublesome place, another second spent here meant another second of danger. Lin Li hurriedly exchanged greetings, and thought of escaping with Sean and Argus. However, just as he turned around, he heard a loud boom even before he could raise his leg. In the moment when the loud sound was heard, Lin Li felt something had crashed into his chest. In front of him, the world had turned into a burst of colors, and countless stars were flashing. His mind was blank, and he could only hear a buzzing sound. The ground that was covered in blood was shaking, and the sky was dyed red. It looked like the end of the world. The searing flames were raging, and large meteors were ripping up the skies with flames trailing behind them, descending with an aura reminiscent of utter destruction. The shrill screams came in waves. There were more than 100 Silver Storm warriors, but in the blink of an eye, more than 10 of them were knocked out. Even the steadfast Silver Storm started to panic in the wake of this legendary fire power. Nobody could stand up against meteors, much less defend against the legendary spell, Firestorm, with their shields. The only thing they could do was to run and distance themselves from this area that was filled with death. Boom! Boom! The deafening sounds were incessant. The whole area seemed to be trembling. Countless meteors landed on the fire plume ridge and stirred up a magnificent flare. Initially, there were 100 or so Silver Storm warriors, but less than half of them escaped from the firestorm. Piles of coke on the battlefield gave out a charred smell, which was mixing with the thick scent of blood. It brought tears to their eyes. What a cursed thing, Lin Li rubbed his nose. He did not want to continue watching. The 100 of Silver Storm were considered the best adventurers in Alana, not in the least inferior when compared to the army of the Felon Kingdom. Yet, when they fought against a legendary beast like the salamander, they were sacrificed like cannon fodder. Just when he wanted to escape with both his companions after recovering from the shock with difficulty, Lin Li realized that the sword-wielding middle-aged man started to emit a strong aura. There was a silver combat energy, appearing as though a silver flame was tightly hugging him. The middle-aged man was no longer the same normal person as before. The aura emitted from his body was unique to the strongest people. Lin Li had felt such an aura before from a few people, for example, Anduin, Old Grim, and Aldwin. Even Macklin could not give Lin Li such a sensation. F***ck. Lin Li fell backwards and landed on his butt. King Hell, this guy is Sword Sage of the Storm. Almost immediately, Lin Li's complexion changed. It had to be a joke. The Sword Sage of the Storm had to demonstrate his strength now out of all times. Aren't you luring the salamander to me? Just when the salamander was insatiable, the Sword Sage of the Storm chose this time to be showy. This was more alluring than a strong aphrodisiac for that legendary beast. When this incomparable aura was emitted, it immediately sent the salamander into a frenzy, luring it over. Fuck, Lin Li really thought that he was going to die. This should be what it is like to suffer from another person's disaster. The sword sage of the storm had nothing better do and challenged the salamander. What has this got to do with me? It's okay if you die, but what about me? The pitiful me had just broken through to the archmage realm, and I haven't had enough fun yet. Do I have to accompany an *hole like you in death? Immediately, Lin Li's face turned white. He ran forward, without caring which path he chose, and pointed his middle finger. *ck your mom, sword sage of the storm. Argus seemed to have been struck by lightning when he heard these words. Argus, escape faster. Are you courting death? Oh, after Lin Li shouted, Argus snapped out of his shock, but he still felt dizzy. Fuck, this guy is too arrogant. He even dares to scold the sword sage of the storm, and in such a crude manner at that. I'm not sure if the sword sage of the storm would be so infuriated that he vomited blood if he heard that. Lin Li did not know if the sword sage of the storm would vomit blood, he only knew that he himself was about to vomit blood. This was what you reap what you sow meant. After passing through a pile of rocks, Lin Li suddenly realized that he had nowhere else to run. Looking down, there were only precipitous rock face and sheer cliffs that looked like knives and axes. After observing the surroundings, there was not a single mountain track in any direction. What a huge joke, Lin Li swallowed hard, and started to recall the path he took. He then realized that he must have taken the wrong turn when he ran without caring which path he chose. What do we do now? Argus started to be scared as well. Originally, with his level 16 archmage realm strength, going in the wrong direction would not be an issue. At most, he could use the levitation spell and descend from the top of the mountain to the base. He just had to use up some mana. It just had to be so coincidental that the first time he had nowhere else to go was also the time he lost most of his powers. After being shot by the strange bolt in the cave, more than half of his powers disappeared. Now, he only had the power of a level 10 mage at best. He would struggle to use Feather Fall spell, much less the levitation spell. Lin Li had the power of an archmage now, but with the strength of one person, how could he bring 2 more people along? Even if he were to abandon Argus, the prisoner, there was still the monster Sean. His weight was twice as much as Argus. Fuck, I'll fight it out with you. After being driven into a corner, Lin Li lost his temper. Without saying anything else, he opened the Ring of Endless Storm, and took out 10 glass bottles along with different middle and low-tier herbs. You too, keep a lookout for trouble. You absolutely must not let anything distract me. Mr. Fellick, this is, Argus was confused, this was already the second time he had seen this fella take out glass bottles and herbs. If you want to live, then cut the bullshit. The 6 great mercenary corps were completely routed, struggling for their lives in the sea of fire created by the salamander. The adventurers that were huddling up together just now were letting out shrill screams. They were surrounded by flames and smoke on all sides. Furthermore, there were giant meteors dropping from the sky occasionally, leaving deep scars in the fire plume ridge. Just by looking at this battlefield, it seemed to resemble hell. The ground seemed to be cooked. Every step felt hot and soft, and there were even bubbles appearing with poof, poof, poof. There was not a single adventurer that was alive within a 100-meter radius of the salamander. The whole fire plume ridge was like it entered doomsday under the cataclysmic heat. The salamander was like a grim reaper from hell waving an invincible blazing scythe amidst the fire, incessantly claiming the lives of adventurers. Argus sweated profusely after witnessing this horrific scene. Time was ticking away, yet the fella named Fellick was squatting down and busy with something. He'd set up a mithril crucible on the ground, shoving herbs inside. The herbs started boiling with poof sounds, and Argus thought he was going to die while smelling the thick herbal scent. This fella still has the mood to cook at this hour. The hell? Just as Argus was mumbling, he suddenly felt a Herculean aura coming from afar. After which, he saw a beam of silver light rushing into the sky like a silver comet, and it tore apart the sky full of red clouds. The haggard-looking sword sage of the storm was now giving off a tremendous amount of energy. The silver flares ripped the red clouds apart and descended like lightning, instantaneously tearing a hole in the flames that filled the sky. Too strong. Argus was frozen in place. The strength of the legendary realm was far beyond his imagination. It was an usage of power that was pushed to the extreme. The world seemed to have become silent with just a stroke of the sword. The magnificent rays of light released from the sword formed a perfect arc in the sky. These rays of light appeared to be unusually magnificent in this field filled with corpses and blood. Aru! The salamander's roar was heard immediately as though a thunderbolt had struck its head. Instantly, a heat wave could be felt, and there was debris flying everywhere on the battlefield. With a sweep of its long tail, the salamander brought forth waves of apocalyptic heat. Even the sword sage of the storm had no choice but to take evasive actions in the face of the salamander's immense strength. With a legendary sword sage on one side and a legendary magical beast on the other, the battle between them was divinely. There were flames and blade aura everywhere. The debris that was sent upward filled the air and painfully struck everyone. Red clouds were rolling in the air, pressuring everyone till they were breathless. Even the members of the 6 Great Mercenary Corps were attracted to this electrifying battle. They had forgotten about escaping and the danger. It was as if they were possessed, watching this once-in-a-century electrifying battle intently. It was especially so for Sean. He did not even blink while watching. He stared at the sword sage of the storm's every move. This legendary powerhouse's every attack and evasion seemed to open up a new world for him. Argus, who was at the side, was really anxious. He looked at Lin Li, who was far away, and Sean, who was beside him. Immediately, he was filled with regret, and there were thousands of should not have in his mind. I should not have came to the damned fire plume ridge. Now everything is in a mess, and I've been captured by these 2 fellas that do not know what is death. Look at these 2 fellas, one is cooking, and the other is just watching a show. Do they not know that staying around longer will only lead to death? Never mind this black bear, in any case, he was really stupid. As for that fella called Felix, why did he suddenly become so idiotic? Of all things he could do, he started cooking out in the open. What was the use of cooking that big pot of herbs? Even if you were cooking a large pot of manticore tail, would you be able to poison the salamander? That is a legendary magical beast. Even if you were able to concoct something venomous, it would be evaporate instantly. This is just seeking death. Fuck, this method will not do. Argus looked around, and felt that he could not wait any longer. Otherwise, it would spell trouble if they were not able to wait for the cooking to finish, but instead receive a firestorm while waiting. However, Argus was watching for a long while, and he indeed could not find any route to escape. The battle between the 2 legendary powerhouses was too violent. The frantic powers had seemingly engulfed the whole peak of the fire plume ridge except the small area where he was at and the corner where the 6 Great Mercenary Corps were squeezed at. Even though they were in a safe corner, it was still occasionally struck by the rain of fire streaming down from the skies. The reason why the 6 Great Mercenary Corps could endure for so long was due to the elemental shield conjured simultaneously by nearly 100 mages. Under the protection of the elemental shield, they only managed to struggle for a chance to gasp a breath. It's over, Argus was feeling troubled. The battle between the salamander and the sword sage of the storm was red-hot. Furthermore, whether intentionally or not, the sword sage of the storm was constantly moving backwards. Coincidentally, the area that he was moving towards was the only safe spot on the whole mountain peak. Fuck, I am done for. Seeing that the shimmering golden flares creeping towards him, Argus could not tolerate it anymore. He turned over and lashed out at Lin Li, if you guys are trying to die, don't drag me down as well. Shut up. Sean was observing the sword sage of the storm fighting style intently, and yet he suddenly heard this fella being disrespectful towards Mr. Felix. Of course, without saying anything more, he turned around and landed a fist on his head. It almost caused a large swell on the spot. Argus hugged his head, it was so painful that he almost teared. The punch from this fella was like a rock striking his head. Argus was in so much pain that his whole body spasmed. Argus, let me say once more. If you want to live, then cut the bullshit. Lin Li's voice came from afar, it sounded rather annoyed. He was busy adjusting the proportions of all sorts of potions. He did not have the mood to bicker with Argus. He bent down and continued adjusting the proportions of the various bottles of potions after warning him once. Behave yourself. Mr. Fellick will come up with a solution. Sean gripped his fist, and the distinct cracks coming from his joints made Argus' scalp tingle upon hearing the sound. Under this indiscreet threat of violence, Argus obediently shut his mouth, but he had already cursed Sean several times in his mind. Fuck, only an idiot like you would believe that that fella has a solution. What kind of solution would he have? He has been cooking his soup for almost half an hour. Just wait. In another 2 minutes, the salamander will rush over. Just a breath of his would kill the two of you. Fuck, I am just pitiful. I could have stayed at Alana perfectly, but I just had to kill myself at the Fire Plume Ridge. With each passing second, the battle between the salamander and the sword sage of the storm got more intense. Everybody, including Argus, started to feel anxious. The salamander's body was simply too powerful. Not only was it strong, it was also tough and flexible. It could be described as an iron body. Even though the sword sage of the storm was strong, it would also be difficult for him to harm the opponent before his combat energy ran out. The opposite was true for the salamander as well. Its powerful tail and sharp fangs and claws were its strongest weapons. Furthermore, it did not even have to use powers of the flame. With just a swipe of its claws, the sword sage of the storm had no choice but to start dodging. No matter how powerful a legendary powerhouse was, he was still immortal. They could not use their physical strength to go up against a magical beast like the salamander. Hence, the thing the sword sage of the storm could do was to draw back. He drew back until he finally reached the only safe spot in the whole peak. It's over. Looking at the blazing flares, Argus' heart sank. When Lin Li stood up, his face looked rather exhausted. Ever since he came to Amril, he had never been as busy as today. Even if it was at the Emerald Tower, helping Jirian make all sorts of emergency potions in a single night, it did not wear him out as it did now. After all, those were regular potions, the highest level of the recipes was only high tier. However, every single bottle of these potions were made from high-tiered recipes. One of them was even a Grandmaster's recipe. Furthermore, for such a lazy person like Lin Li, today was a rare occasion that he took out the mithril pot without using magic skills to cut corners. I hope these things work. If not, I will be in deep trouble, Lin Li mumbled as he bent down to pick up those bottles and placed them in his pockets, causing the robe of the void to bulge. After that, with a rushed recitation, a levitation spell was cast. Argus looked at the soaring Lin Li and was dumbfounded. He could not figure out what this fella was thinking about, because he clearly saw that the direction this fella flew in was actually towards the heart of this raging storm. This. Is this what it means to seek death? Argus' eyes were staring straight. As Lin Li flew further, a few of the adventurers from the 6 great mercenary corps with sharp eyes also discovered his silhouette. What the hell? Serena lost half of her silver storm, and her heart raging with pain. Yet, she suddenly saw a familiar silhouette flying in the sky. Instantaneously, Serena seemed to have forgotten about her heartache, and stared at the sky with a blank look as though she was puppet standing there. I'm not blind, right? That seems like... Mr. Fellick? Aragon's mouth was wide open. He stared at the sky as though he had seen a flying dinosaur. Oh my god. At the same time, the 2 archers from Red Dragon Mercenary Corps also discovered the flying silhouette. Those 2 unlucky fellas that were supposed to raid the mine were staring at each other. They looked like it was unbelievable. They did not believe anything, as they tried to rob a person like this previously. A kid that was not even 10 years old would know what it meant for a mortal to be flying in the air, much less these two adventurers that were close to level 10. It meant that it was a power of at least an archmage. We actually tried to rob this archmage before. As soon as they remembered the scene at the forest, both of them fell to the ground simultaneously. It's a hallucination. This must be a hallucination. Serena would not believe it. This low-leveled reckless warrior that was carrying a crossbow every day actually had the strength of an archmage? That's right, that's right. This must be a hallucination. That fella must have cheated. Hank, who was hiding at the side, puckered his lips, and thought to himself, I knew it all along, I just did not dare to tell you all. After witnessing the miracles of the young mage numerous times, Hank was already numb to it all. Not to mention that he could fly, Hank would not even find it weird if he could spit fire. As Lin Li flew higher and higher in the sky, the number of people that saw him grew. Initially, it was just whispers within a small area, but with each passing second, the whole 6 great mercenary corps and hundreds of adventurers took notice of the figure flying in the sky. Immediately, there were discussions everywhere. Nobody knew where did this fella, who had the power of at least an archmage, came from. Elijah rubbed his nose, and had a triumphant look on his face that was barely concealable. I am too brilliant, Elijah shamelessly praised himself. Thinking about it carefully, ever since the misunderstanding in Nightmare Mountains, he had never offended this young mage. Even when he'd coincidentally bumped into him at the Guild of Magic by some freak chance, he would also be willing to admit his mistake and apologize. He had never thought of resisting. At this moment, Elijah rejoiced. Fortunately, he never had any thoughts of resisting. That was an archmage that was not even 20 years old. There was no need to mention what strength he harbored. Just by looking at his accomplishments, one could imagine how powerful his mentor was. Just by looking at Felon Kingdom, who would be able to produce an archmage who was not even 20 years old through his teachings? Just by counting, there could only be those few, Anduin, Aldwin, and probably Grim Burnside from the Pharmacists' Guild. Which one these old monsters was to be trifled with? Elijah had cold sweat dripping all over his body, just thinking about the consequences of offending any of them. Captain Elijah, are we attacking? Just as Elijah was feeling proud of himself, an archer suddenly appeared beside him. The archer had already prepared his bow and arrow, full of killing intent. He even used his finger to point at the magician in the sky. It seemed like he was asking whether to shoot that fella down. Attack you head. Elijah immediately became furious, and kicked him to the corner of the mountain. What an idiot, attacking that guy? Do you think that a salamander is not stimulating enough? With the levitation spell, Lin Li slowly flew to the area above the battlefield. Looking from his current position, he could easily observe the battle between the two legendary powerhouses clearly. The Sword Sage of the Storm had indeed been put at a disadvantage. The salamander's powerful body had allowed it to gain an advantage in this battle. Unless the Sword Sage of the Storm went all out, it would be hard to damage it significantly even with the sword. Its long tail and sharp claws and fangs made the Sword Sage of the Storm fearful. Just a single touch from them would result in severe injuries. It was needless to talk about the powerful fire magical element that was contained within that tail, claws, and fangs. It was not easy for the Sword Sage of the Storm to last till this point. However, from the looks of it, it seemed like he was unable to last any longer. Being in the sky, Lin Li had deeper understanding of the battle than the members of the 6 great mercenary corps. He could clearly see that the footsteps of the Sword Sage of the Storm got lighter. It was a sign of exhaustion. The silver flame surrounding the sword started to get dimmer, and it was no longer as radiant as before. It had only been 1 minute since Lin Li used the levitation spell to fly to the space above the battle, and the Sword Sage of the Storm had already been pushed back by almost 10 more meters. To be pushed back for almost 10 meters when evenly matched could only mean that the party that got pushed back was exhausted. I've already concocted the potions, please don't let me down. You must hold on. Lin Li held the potions in one hand, he looked nervous. These tens of bottles had already been concocted, so whether his plan would be successful depended on the ability of the Sword Sage of the Storm to help him fight for a chance. Aragon, Serena frowned while looking for a long time, and she still could not figure out what that fella was trying to do by flying there. Instantly, she asked her trusted subordinate with uncertainty, "Do you think that guy went mad?" "I'm not sure as well." Aragon shook his head, he looked rather concerned. "But, Mr. Felix seems to be rather rash." Aragon's words were put in a rather courteous manner. For Lin Li's current situation, at least 9 out of 10 people would spit at him and add, courting death. Even if he was an archmage, was there a need to be so arrogant? One had to know that those two entangled together were a legendary magic shooter and a legendary sword sage. If an archmage were to be caught up in this vortex, nothing good would come out of it. If the sword sage of the storm's blade aura were to splash over, to say nothing of the salamander's cataclysmic fire magic, how could an archmage guarantee that he would come out unscathed? Duh, Serena took a glance at the floating silhouette, and scolded him harshly. That's obvious. This guy had always been reckless, nothing special. What I am asking is, are you able to tell what is he trying to do? Aragon was at a loss. I can't tell. I guess, at this point, Hank, who had been behind a rock all the while, suddenly said softly, I guess Mr. Felix is trying to help. Help? Serena grunted. Can he? Aragon rubbed his nose and kept quiet. However, from his expression, it could be seen that he did not believe that Mr. Felix would be of much help. No, we need to find a way to get this fella down. Serena looked at the floating silhouette, she looked rather anxious. Aragon, I order you to hurry and think of a way. Aragon was dumbfounded, his expression looked worse than crying. Captain Serena, you think too highly of me, asking me to come up with a solution now. What kind of solution can I come up with? How can I fly up there and bring that fella down? I am not an archmage. In fact, Serena knew it herself. There was no solution available at this time. Those two fighting were legendary powerhouses. Other than that reckless fella, who else dared to interfere with their fight? Yet the problem was that that reckless fella had saved her life before. Serena could not watch on as he died. Damned archmage. Serena scolded harshly. She could not come up with a solution no matter how hard she thought about it. The members of the Silver Hand were whispering to one another. Likewise, the other mercenary corps were also discussing. Almost everyone were speculating what this fella was trying to do by rushing into the sky. Some said he wanted to help the sword sage of the storm, but he never made any moves. Some said he wanted to watch the fun, yet he was too close. Going up there at this time would only result in severe injuries, nothing good would come out of it. Amongst the crowd, it could be said that only Hank and Elijah were the most unperturbed. They knew Lin Li the longest, and had gone through the most scare caused by him. After going through it repeatedly, they had already become numb to it. They even did not think that Lin Li would run into trouble. This was almost like an instinct, just like eating when you were hungry or drinking when you were thirsty. It was a completely logical and obvious train of thought. Being the focus of the crowd's gazes, Lin Li did not budge at all. He just floated in the sky quietly, waiting for that fleeting chance. The sword sage of the storm had already been pushed the borders of the fire plume ridge, and it looked like he was about to be pushed into a hopeless situation where he could no longer retreat. This time, the sword sage of the storm did not retreat further. He grabbed the sword with both hands, and the silver flame surrounding his body surged. Instantly, the infinite silver flames flushed to the sword's body. Under this flush of silver flames, the almost 1 meter long sword instantly expanded, creating a silver fire wall that was up to 10 meters tall. This time, the sword sage of the storm did not retreat further. He grabbed the sword with both hands, and the silver flame surrounding his body surged. Instantly, the infinite silver flames flushed to the sword's body. Under this flush of silver flames, the almost 1 meter long sword instantly expanded, creating a silver fire wall that was up to 10 meters tall. Boom! There was a loud sound, the overspreading silver flames rolled up, and the apocalyptic aura dissipated. Even Lin Li, who was in the sky, felt stifled. The red flames and white blade aura instantly invoked a florid scene that seemed like a dream. The two different colors, warm and cold, mixed together. The brilliance dazzled everyone. Within the overspreading silver flames, a shimmering light shot through like a comet. Lin Li clearly saw that it was the sword from the sword sage of the storm's hands. Aru! This was closely followed by a shriek. Even with the salamander's incomparable body, it finally gave way to the sword sage of the storm's all-out attack. In a hurry, it only barely managed to block its most vital part, its head. Next, silver light flashed by and the salamander's long tail was instantly chopped off by the sword sage of the storm's sword. Bomb! The muffled sound could only be heard after a while. The tail that was cleaved off heavily fell on the ground. Instantaneously, there was crimson-red blood spewing everywhere. The thick scent of blood permeated the air. It was so suffocating that even Lin Li, who was in the sky, started to frown. Shrill roars came in quick succession and traveled throughout the whole fire plume ridge. Even the fire crows at the bottom of the ridge were so frightened that they took to the skies in flocks. Being provoked by pain that it had never felt before, the ferocious head of the salamander fiercely rose up. Its small pair of eyes was filled with inexhaustible hatred. Two of its protruding teeth were shimmering in the dazzling flare, and its red tongue was flickering. The hiss it let out made everyone's skin crawl. Shit! Lin Li, being in the sky, was crystal clear on the changes in the battlefield. When he saw the salamander flickering its tongue, he knew that situation was not going well. The earth-shaking strike just now had completely exhausted the sword sage of the storm's energy. If the salamander were to attack now, he would not have the ability to resist it. As expected, just when Lin Li said sh*t, the salamander's front paw's claws had already created an afterimage. Swish! A tearing sound could be heard, and what followed was blood spewing. In that instant, Lin Li thought that Isekaied had been ripped into two. The razor-sharp claws slashed at the chest. With a tchh, it had ripped out a long wound on the sword sage of the storm's body. Yet, simultaneously, a silver flight shot out from the sword sage of the storm's hand like lightning. Aru! Salamander's shriek this time was more intense than the previous time. The salamander's ferocious head arched backwards, and red blood spewed out from its right eye like raindrops. The sword that was surrounded by silver flames was like a nail hammered into the salamander's right eye. This bloody scene made everyone freeze. Nobody had thought that the battle between these two legendary powerhouses would be so bloody. Lin Li, who was in the sky, was admiring it silently. The sword sage of the storm was indeed the sword sage of the storm. In such exhaustion, he still managed to severely wound a powerhouse like the salamander with just a throw of his sword. Just with this unexpected strike, he had already pulled back the balance of power that was originally against him. However, it was not important to Lin Li whether it had been pulled back. It was because the chance that he wanted was right in front of his eyes. First, the salamander's tail had been chopped off, and now, one of its eyes had been stabbed. Even if the salamander was a legendary magical beast, it had finally lost its sanity. Its earth-shattering roar was filled with pain and hatred. It was pounding its ferocious head against the floor. The dull bomb sounds could be felt in everyone's chest. The body that lost a tail was flailing about. The scales that were covered in dirt and sand gave everyone goosebumps. The heavily wounded salamander started to lose the flames from its body. The numerous scales seemed to be dull. This was the sign of energy depletion. The salamander would retract the flames from its body only when it was severely wounded to prevent itself from being burned when it was exhausted. However, such a retraction was not actually a complete disappearance. It was just that the salamander used its innate ability to control the flames and hid them inside its body, and this was the chance that Lin Li was waiting for. Salamander, bro, it's time for you have a taste of some medicine. Just as the flames receded, Lin Li took off his robe of the void. A robe that was worth 100,000 of gold coins was made into a bundle by him in a matter of seconds. It was like a package held in his hands. He furiously enhanced his mana output, then, he charged down like an arrow that had just been shot by an arrow. He. What is he doing? This sudden action instantly made Serena have a scare. She saw that fella descend like a meteor, plunging straight towards the raging salamander. What the hell, is he courting death? Oh my god, Aragon was dumbfounded. He could no longer understand anything anymore about that strange fella in the sky. Since killing Thuzaden at Black Hills Town, everything that this fella did seemed to be out of everyone's expectations. Today was even worse, for unfathomable things came in consecutively. He had transformed from a low-level warrior into a powerful archmage. And now, he had taken off his robe and charged towards the salamander. This. What was this? Was he trying to say that it was easier to injure the salamander by taking off the robe? The hundreds of adventurers from the 6 Great Mercenary Corps seemingly cried out in alarm simultaneously. Nobody knew what he was thinking, including Hank and Elijah. They could only watch as he swooped down from the sky like a giant bird. Bon appetit! Lin Li rode the howling winds and flew past the salamander's body with lightning speed. Just as both man and beast were in contact for a split second, the bundle in Lin Li's hand was thrown out and landed inside the salamander's mouth. After that, Lin Li did not stop. Before he left, he had shot out an icicle as though he was trying to help it with its digestion. However, the target for this icicle was actually the salamander's blinded right eye. If it was on any other day, even a mosquito would be stronger than this icicle for the salamander, or maybe the icicle would have been melted by the searing flames before it even reached the salamander. However, now it was severely injured. It had retracted all of the fire magical elements surrounding its body. Although it had a high body temperature, it would not reach the level of melting the icicle. As for this mediocre icicle, it had miraculously plunged into the salamander's right eye. Aru, this grievous, shrill cry echoed, and almost everyone could feel the salamander's rage. In fact, even the members of the 6 Great Mercenary Corps felt sympathy. This what it meant to lose one's dignity. A legendary magical beast had been struck in the right eye by a level 1 spell. If this news were to spread, it might be able to cause the salamander's enemies to die from laughing. This action that was very insulting, like giving a slap to the salamander, which had an intelligence that was not inferior to humans. Its heart was filled with rage like never before. It even caused it to forget the wounds on its body and the other human that had injured it. Amidst the dust and smoke, the salamander moved like a red-colored lightning and charged towards Lin Li, who was in the sky. Unfortunately, Lin Li was not Alikir. He had never thought about going head-to-head with the salamander. At the moment when the salamander charged forward, Lin Li's mana had already been raised to the maximum. With the support of his demon-like mana, the Archmage level's levitation spell almost had the effects of power of flight. In that instance, Lin Li was like a stream of light and whizzed past the salamander's body. After that, the crowd saw him grinning while landing beside the sword sage of the storm's body. Guildmaster, need any help? Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.